I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Tonight, I've got a really fascinating individual to introduce you to, an author, a lawyer, a finance expert, someone who I followed through her career and was really, frankly, surprised when she became a author. And now she's committed to writing several books. Very successful in the legal and financial communities in Toronto, and now a Canadian author. And last weekend was a long weekend. This weekend is a weekend. What I find is in the summertime, I go to fiction and biographies and stop reading some of that nonfiction, how-to books that I read during the balance of the year. So it's kind of fun to have a Canadian author talk about her book. Terry Kirk, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for all the work you're doing around bringing exciting issues forward for your listeners.
I enjoy it, and thank you for writing some interesting books. So tell me, what's your latest book?
This book is called Pitfall, and it is my debut novel, my first. I have three in the works. The second is largely done, and we're just kind of promoting sales of book one, and then moving forward with book two. I'm hoping it'll be out in the spring, and I have a book three in the works. Yes,
and they're about financial catastrophe. Is that correct?
Yeah, I felt that there aren't that many fictional books that have finance at their center. I think in many ways, authors aren't that interested in finance. The big categories are really romance and today fantasy. But finance is just one of those things that affects every one of us in many ways. And Pitfall raises some really fundamental questions about what it would mean to lose it all in a single day.
Lose it all in a single day. So tell me, who's your protagonist?
Yeah, it's a guy named Frank. But some people ask me, why am I writing about a man at the center of my story? But certainly for every move that Frank makes, it affects his wife, Katrina, too, and his family. So it's a story full of women and men. Frank is a trader, and he trades wheat futures on the Chicago Board of Trade. Wheat futures at the time, it was still an agricultural economy. The book is set in 1929. It's kind of an exciting backdrop of time of great riches at the end of the Roaring Twenties and a time of great loss. As we entered into the dirty 30s. So the pivotal moment from this period of great excess to a period of massive, unprecedented loss was really this Black Tuesday, and there was Black Friday as well, but really a period of days in late October 1929. That's Frank's world. He's enjoyed incredible success, he and his wife, during the 1920s. They live in the hoity-toity suburbs of Chicago, the village of Glencoe, and have really achieved everything that people think they're looking for in life. And then he loses it all.
And what happens? Oh, you probably can't tell us that.
I won't tell you everything, except that it is a cataclysmic event for Frank and his family. Not only does he lose everything, he sort of loses more than everything, because Frank is traded on margin, meaning that for every trade he makes, he's borrowed from his trading account. So not only does he lose his home and his fortune, he goes deeply into debt at a time when the job market really disappeared, and there were no clear paths back to his fortune and his life at that time.
Sounds fascinating. Maybe we'll get you to reap something from it later on. But
Yes.
let's take a step back, Terry, if we could. How does one go from, your academic background to being a lawyer, and I think it was a trial lawyer, and then entering the world of finance to becoming an author? Tell me a little bit about you and your
Yeah,
career
well, these
trajectory.
good question. Thank you, Brian. And it does sound a little jumping aroundish, but I like to think that writing was a common theme through that, a love of the word and a love of stories. And there's nothing better for those passions than practicing law, I found.
I've
Certainly
been
on the
told that a good trial lawyer is
yeah.
one that can tell a good story to the judge or the jury. Is that true?
I think it is a lot about storytelling. That may sound a little facetious around the need to bring forward facts, but I think it's about listening to client stories, which are inevitably very gritty stories. People aren't in front of lawyers and facing litigation unless there are stories of betrayal or loss or fraud or some of these darker qualities in human life. So, yeah, but practicing law is significantly about hearing your clients' stories and their hardships and weaving them into compelling stories in front of decision makers.
And how long were you a trial lawyer?
I worked for 12 years as a lawyer and in litigation and general litigation, general practice. I did find I loved law, but was looking for maybe less gritty ways of practicing law and thinking about the law. It's very demanding to be a trial lawyer, especially when you're raising a family. The hours are extremely erratic, very unpredictable. You have matters going before the court that sometimes can take weeks and weeks and weeks, and sometimes they collapse, and suddenly your schedule is wide open, which is nice. But it is a very demanding from a time point of view, but also I think emotionally, as a good story does. It weighs on you, and you takes over your life in many ways. So I moved from law into finance. Worked
Not
as
many
a
lawyers can do that successfully. How'd you do it?
it is a really difficult navigation. There's no doubt about it. And in my experience, I used to have what I called the two beer rule, and you'd sit down with somebody and have a beer with somebody. I mean, a lawyer. And generally, in the first beer, it would be, yeah, things are great. I'm loving it, loving my practice, having a great time. Nothing better than practicing law. And by the second beer, people would kind of open up a little bit about how difficult it was and how could you find a path out. Um, the money is good in law, so that becomes a bit of an addiction, I think, to remaining really committed to earning good money. Secondly, I think after a few years, the market isn't that interested in lawyers. They find lawyers to be conservative and putting on the brakes and cautious, and businesses are looking for more risk tolerant executives. So it's not an easy navigation. I know many friends who are still practicing law who would have liked to have found a different path. And of course, many just love practicing law. But for me, I did decide that I wanted to leverage into other areas, and the technology sector was really exploding at the time. And I went back to school and took a master's degree focusing on transformative technologies, and was hired as an executive at Bell Canada. I worked as a vice president for Bell at a time when Bell and Nortel were still glued at the hip, and they were really Canada's largest corporation by far. So it was an exhilarating time to be in that industry.
After 12 years of being a trial lawyer, you went back to school to do an MBA? Really?
I didn't really go back to school, to be honest. I did it on top of practicing law, and I took yes 2 years and did the an executive program that was kind of weekends and evenings, and that worked out well. I think that kind of, let's call it, disruptive change is required if you're committed to leveraging your legal background into a new career, that you have to do something to step outside of the traditional law firm environment. So that's what I did, and it worked really well. And I loved the learning period of learning and going back to school at that stage, and was able to leverage into kind of corporate life and very technology centric roles.
And then you decided to write. Did you always think you were going to end up being an author? I know you said that you wrote when you were a lawyer, but writing a book is very different than writing a an oral address to a judge, or even all the different things one has to write in a litigation. How did you do that transition to decide to become an author? Did you go back to school and take a creative writing course, or what?
Aha, that's a good question. No, I didn't. I was able, through my business career, to frankly put myself in a position where I could write full time. So, that I didn't need to transition in that sense. And I'm pleased to be able to write full time. I look at friends who, work as whatever, nurses, doctors, in the tech sector, and they're trying to write their novels in their spare time. And personally, I can't really imagine navigating those two worlds at the same time. So it has come at a stage. This writing career has come at a stage where I can focus on it full time, and I absolutely do. Not only full time, but it's occupying you, night and day. I think it was. Was it Michael Lewis who said, if you're not talking to your characters in the shower, you're just not that into your book. So I think that's true. But your
So
question was,
you talk to your characters in the shower. That's fun.
oh, yes. In fact, I would say, yeah, your best period to indulge in character development is really when you step away from your writing environment and go for a walk. Walking and musing in the shower, kind of relaxing. It's um, it's a real combination of left brain and right brain, this writing business. People think of it as creative, and some of it is. I would say about 10% of the task of writing a novel is creative, dreaming up characters, thinking about their plot and what happens next, and what does Katrina say when she finds, her family has lost everything and is devastated, and especially at a time in 1929 when women's roles were and their powers and authority were so extremely limited. So those thoughts tend to come to you, yes, when you step away from active writing in the shower, out for a walk, sometimes talking it over with friends.
Did you have to do a lot of research of 1929, 1930, Black Monday, etc.?
Yes, there are different ways of describing my book, and I'm kind of saying books now because I finished writing book two, which is called Plunder, by the way. So book one is Pitfall, and book two is Plunder. And Pitfall takes place in the trading pit in 1929 and focuses on that crash, which was a trading crash that disproportionately affected people in financial services markets, traders, bankers, financial advisors, investors, entrepreneurs, et cetera, who were really engaged in the market. Book two focuses on the financing of World War II, so it's a very different constituency. It's about, soldiers and young people being drafted and the steel industry, etc. So it's a different constituency. Yeah, anyway, I'll return to your
Why
question.
why cataclysmic financial issues as the topic, as the subject?
Yeah, I feel like I didn't know quite as much as I wanted to know about these things, and I have, quite a deep background in law and finance, and yet I really didn't understand why did the market crash in that way? Could it happen again? What was the difference between 1929 and today's economy? We certainly live in volatile times. Um, can a crash like that happen again? So I had a quest to understand More, I think, in part because of the times we live in, where there is great volatility. That we also have a fraught border today, a Canada-U.S. border, which was also the case in 1929. Today, it's about tariffs. At that time, it was about prohibition. America was heavily invested in prohibition. Its army was engaged in preventing the sale of liquor, to place such high value on that issue. And of course, most of the liquor supply was coming in from Canada across the border, across the
Boy, it
Great.
sounds like the fentanyl crisis.
Yes, it has a lot of parallels to today, and great resentment in America about the flow of alcohol and the undermining of this important fundamental public policy they had, this antagonism to liquor, that was being undermined by the shipment of whiskey into U.S. markets, mostly into Chicago, where Frank's family lived in my story, Pitfall.
What a fascinating background you've had, and sounds like an interesting topic for some books. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Terry Kirk in just a few minutes. And Terry, do you have a section from the book that you
Sure,
might like to read for us and
I'd
give
be
us a
happy to
sense
do
of
that.
your writing and the story of Frank?
I will. I'll do that for you after the break, Brian.
We'll be back in 2 minutes with Terry Kirk, a Canadian author. It's the weekend, so it's time to think about what you might want to pick up this weekend. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got a Canadian author, Terry Kirk, with us tonight. She's got a really interesting background. She's been a trial lawyer for about 12 years, and then she entered the world of finance as an executive, and did an executive MBA. And then she decided to become an authoress and author a book that is about financial catastrophes. And the first one is set in 1929. What's the book, Terry? What's it called?
The book is called Pitfall, and it's a gritty story. And my publisher tells me gave it a gritty cover, so just to match the story. And Pitfall examines the 1929 market crash, the biggest economic crash ever. And by biggest, I mean more money's lost in a relative sense, and global economic crisis. So the story takes place in what was commonly known the pit, the trading pit. The pits were not like today's modern trading environments, which are electronic and kind of clean and quite sterile places. So I'll read you a little section about
That'd be great. We'd appreciate that.
it. When the Chicago Board of Trade opened its nine-story tower in 1883, it was dubbed America's boldest building. Decades later, the trading pit in the Great Hall still took Frank's breath away. Its stained glass skylight soared 80 feet above the floor and filled the room with dimpled light. There were granite columns, a frescoed ceiling, majestic windows, and full-length curtains that kept sunlight and peering eyes off the board. In the center was the amphitheater, which gave the pit its telltale name. Only those who'd paid handsomely for a seat on the Board of Trade were allowed in. Frank stood at the back of the pit, waiting for the opening gong. Across the front of the room ran the board, the giant slab of slate covering the entire height and width of that towering wall. A labyrinth of metal scaffolding stood between the traders and the board. And a dozen clerks scurried around the catwalks, scaling the ladders, scribbling the bids and answer prices, and sending chalk debris falling like fairy dust from the sky. The room was awash with brawny, athletic men wearing the white, unstructured jackets worn by traders in the pit. Many had wrestled their way through college, and some sported noses that looked like they'd been reshaped by an illegal right hook. When prices rose, half the room roared in victory, and the other half wailed in pain. Almost no one lasted more than a few months. The few who succeeded knew how to out-yell their colleagues and elbow their ways to the front of the room. The stench of their sweat and adrenaline filled the pit during trading hours and lingered long after markets closed.
Fantastic. And this is about the 1929 crash. How long do you follow Frank and his family?
It's the story takes place over a few months. It's kind of Frank's winter of discontent that starts with the October 29 crash and follows his reaction to that crash. We do know that some traders threw themselves out windows, and in the case of Chicago, off the Clark Street Bridge. What was it that caused him to do that? My sense is shame. That men were motivated by this just absolutely intense shame, and Frank was felt very full of shame too. And I think this is something we can all relate to when we've experienced an unexpected and disastrous loss in our life. Is that and sometimes it's through a divorce, sometimes it's through an economic loss, maybe it's a loss of a job, a loss of your status, but yeah, it's a tremendous sense of shame. And how does one cope with that sense of failure? Now, that sounds pretty dark, but Pitfall is and ultimately a story of redemption and a man's search to redefine himself without some of the trappings that he thought did define his life. He thought it was all about wealth and being the biggest trader in town and having the biggest and best house, Frank Lloyd Wright kind of house, by the way, in Chicago in 1929. And when he was stripped of it all, and really, it was a matter of about an hour and a half. Trading opened at 10 a.m., and it was the biggest sell-off in the world. By 11:15, Frank had lost everything. So, how did he redefine himself as a man and as a provider? So Frank goes on a journey. It's a physical journey. It's an adventure, searching for a way back to his life, a way back to his fortune, a way back to who he thought he was. And it's, a metaphorical journey as well. It's full of adventure, full of some very challenging and frightening moments for him. It's full of poignant and sad moments and reflection as well.
Are there lessons for all of us in Frank's journey and redemption?
Yes, I think that there are. I think it is his story about how he coped with tragedy, but I think that people can relate to Frank's journey. There are some things he did that I think were very bad behavior, and hopefully others wouldn't do. But I think it is a time when perhaps bad behavior was called upon, or he he just felt the need to kind of not do what he should have done, perhaps. And it's not just Frank's journey, of course. Frank's loss triggers a great sense of upheaval in the lives of people around him, his partners, his colleagues, his wife, of course, and children who are financially dependent.
Tell us a little bit about her if you could, and how did she deal with it all?
Yeah, I really like Katrina. Katrina's Polish by background. I'm not Polish, but I kind of enjoyed exploring that story for her. She was a woman whose family had fled Poland and the hunger there and resettled and had a great rise up herself from the south side of Chicago into wealthy suburban life with her husband. So one day Frank doesn't come home and he just simply disappears after the market crash. So this sends her life into chaos financially. The bank account is frozen and gone, and so just the ability to stay in their home and continue their children's schooling and so on, that she suffers great loss at that front. But I think, again, not to minimize that, but again, it's kind of the emotional upheaval that she struggles with most. What has her husband killed himself? Has he been murdered? Has he disappeared? Why would he disappear? What has she done wrong as a wife to trigger those kinds of responses? And as time passes, she has to veer from anger to betrayal to sadness and loss, excuse me, and misbehaves in her own ways as well.
Is she a stand by your man kind of gal, or
Hmm. I would say briefly no. I think that women didn't have a lot of choices to be financially independent. They weren't able to take out credit in their own name. She couldn't get a meeting with the banker, and certainly couldn't renegotiate the mortgage. So there was a financial and psychological dependence on her partner. But she's a smart woman. She studied philosophy at university at a time when women were not really studying. She brings a kind of, deep and complex capacity to her trying to solve these problems that are thrust upon her. So, yeah, I think she finds herself in a new world. They both do.
And does
Um,
she have a redemption story as well, or is it mainly Frank?
I think it's really about Frank's journey, and one that's cast upon her, which I think is how women's lives were in that sense. Their ability to have big journeys of their own were more limited, and we see that in literature. At the time, the big stories of journeys were, Dorothy getting hit by the storm and ending up in in the Land of Oz, for example, or Alice down the wishing well. Stories of economic loss and loss of one's profession and so on they're really just coming into literature today as women's lives have changed.
Why the focus on financial cataclysmic events, both the big crash, Black Monday, and then World War II? Why is that your focus? Have you had personal experience or litigation experience, or like why is that the interest that you've got?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I guess in my years of professional life, spanning, as you say, the adventures I've had as a lawyer and working with clients, and then more in tech and markets and so on, has been that finance plays an unbelievable role in our lives. That it's quite secretive often. It's really a little below the radar, other than a subset of people, a very small subset, who, really work as bankers and so on, talk about finance quite openly. For the vast majority of people, it's a constant in their life. How do I pay my mortgage this month? What if I lose my job? How will I put food on my table during this COVID crisis? And what if I lose my job at Canada Post? These are the day-to-day concerns that animate all of our lives, and yet they're kind of bound up with a lot of shame and privacy and secrecy. And so that was my decision, is that I felt I'd learned a lot about finance over the years and wanted to share it and explore what it meant in people's lives, and give perhaps a new generation of people some insights into these events that shaped, broadly speaking, their family's life. Who didn't have a grandparent who, maybe came from England or Poland or Scotland, and now increasingly from India or China, and, go through unbelievable financial difficulties associated with that, leaving their finances behind and being stripped of their finances because of war, having to start over in a new country. So, yeah, I feel they're universal experiences and not often the subject of literature, and that was just my commitment to use my background and experience and understanding of financial events to open those up to readers.
What's the topic of the third book? The first one is Black Monday. The second one, World War II. The topic of the third is?
Yeah, the topic of the third looks at the financing of the space race. So these are, I think, the big kind of three events of the last generation that shaped us. And I do have plans, I hope, to go beyond that. Ironically, they take place every kind of 10 or 20 years. We see these cataclysmic events. So 1929, the crash, emanating into the 30s. By 1939-40, we're facing World War II, another massively disruptive event in terms of obviously death and famine and loss, but also economic transformation. The space race is a third story, and I'm following a family, so it becomes a multi-generational saga, one could say, through these events. Frank and his wife Katrina in book one. He's 32 at the time when he loses everything in the crash. by 1939-40, Frank is front and center again in the financing of World War II, and the book becomes set in London, which was so much the nexus of the war at that time. But by 1957, when Russia launches Sputnik, Frank's daughter Franny is now front and center in the book. Frank is into his 60s and has had an early retirement from his firm. His son, I won't talk about that, but his daughter basically has stepped into her father's big footsteps and is running the firm from New York, and becomes very engaged in the financing of America's response to the Russian Sputnik.
And have you got a title for the third one yet?
Yes, it's going to be Probe. So I have Pitfall. I wrestled with whether it was a little bit corny, but I talked to my publisher and an agent and people who know more about these things than me, and it seems like a lot of P words for me in terms of the broad book market. Having something that's kind of identified with you as an author is helpful to readers. So yes, my three books are Pitfall and Plunder, and then Probe.
Fantastic. If people want to buy it, where can they get it?
Yeah, so Pitfall's, in full swing right now. I was really pleased to say that the first edition of the book sold out in about 3 weeks. The second edition is now available. So it's online at your big platforms. In Canada, people tend to be shopping Canadian, so that's indigo.ca. Others belong to, support Amazon, so amazon.ca and amazon.com for international readers, and it's really doing well in the independent bookstores. It's in Canada, let's just say there's fabulous books like Take Cover, and in most cities across Canada, and in the big bookstores like Indigo.
Have you done the audio book version yet?
No, we're just doing those now. The book will come out in Kindle and Kobo. You may know that Indigo uses the Kobo platform and Amazon uses Kindle. So those two versions are coming out in August, so in the next number of weeks. I'm excited by that. And then an audio version is in the works. I'm really thrilled. My publisher is using real actors, and I've been kind of imagining the voice of Frank and Katrina. And
Sounds exciting. We're going to take a break for some messages, and we're going to come back with Terry Kirk, a Canadian author, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got an author, a Canadian book author, Terry Kirk, with us tonight. She's written a book called Pitfall, which is about 1929, the Black Monday, and an individual that goes through financial devastation and redemption. And her second book is about the financing of World War II, and her third book is about the financing of the space age. And it sounds like an interesting series of books. Terry, I wonder if I could take a step back for a second. I've gone through a divorce. I've had some financial challenges in my career. We've all seen, people that have had these challenges in life. Do you think one of the reasons why people want to read stories like what you've written is because they're interested, because it's sort of, for the grace of God, there go I kind of attitude of, and they want to hear the redemption story. They want to hear about how people got through it. I think people feel sort of personally connected with some of these stories that you've been talking about. What do you think?
Yes, I think that is absolutely the attraction to a story of financial loss. It's kind of a secret part of most people's lives. We're not out. We might be bragging about our children openly. We might be bragging about our success in sports and school, but our financial insecurities we tend to be very, very private about. And so, as a way to kind of quietly explore, what would that feel like to lose everything, to lose your home, to lose your job, you lose your all of your savings, at a vulnerable time when you're raising children and so on. What does that feel like? How would I cope with that kind of loss? So I think we can all very few live a full life and don't have some kind of experience with that trepidation. Most will lose a job at some point, suffer a great setback in their savings in the market, for example. Certainly, I relate to that. These they stand out when you look back on your life. These periods of economic or huge upheaval. I had a divorce early in my life and became a single mom for 7 years. I did not have the same kind of hardships that some otherwise I would have. I was a lawyer and was able to, continue to build my career, but it happened at an early stage, and there was a tremendous sense of financial insecurity, financial loneliness maybe is a word of and responsibility on your shoulder that informs my character, Frank, who did feel this great weight on his shoulders of supporting his family, and a great sense of shame when his ability to do so was really ripped away from him. So yeah, I think that is partly why I've written the story, to allow people to address that. And ultimately, it is a positive story. And in my experience, these losses can work out very well for people. That people who lose their jobs and feel devastated do find a way back. And they often emerge as more thoughtful people, more contemplative people. They learn new skills, they learn empathy, and they grow. It's not to minimize the despair that they feel for a period of time, but I think when people have had those crises, yeah, and you run into them 2 or 3 years later, you do see a deeper, more profound, more interesting person has emerged, and that is the story too. It's a story of loss, but it's a story of growth and change, profound growth. Yeah, it's a positive story.
There's this maybe trite, I'm not sure, but there's this saying that is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Hmm.
Do you think that's true? That what doesn't kill you makes you stronger?
Yeah, no, I think that's true, that easy lives don't allow for that much growth or contemplation. That the periods of growth do come from periods of hardship, when you're kind of forced into doing some pretty deep thinking about who you are and what mistakes you made. Some people gloss over that. I did feel, I was 7 years single after my divorce, even though I was a young woman, and could have jumped right into something else quite quickly. I did really feel that I wanted to do the hard work of thinking about what went wrong. What did I bring to the table? It's easy to say, my partner did this or my partner did all these things wrong, and that's an initial reaction, I think. But the growth comes from looking inward and thinking, what did I do wrong? How can I grow? What can I do to make sure that I don't find myself in this situation again pretty quickly?
So much of our
That's
identity is built into what we do for a job and who we're married to. As you think about your own personal life as well as the development of Frank's character and the writing of your books, are there lessons about how you get through job loss, divorce, death, losing of a job, major problems that we all face? Are there lessons that you've learned?
what I learned and what I try to imbue in Pitfall is that imagination is probably the fundamental quality that people need to succeed after a big loss. It seems like an odd character. There's other words that come to mind: persistence, drive, optimism. Those things are true. You need those things as kind of foundations. But what allows you to reimagine yourself? If you'd always thought that you would be Mrs. Jones and suddenly you're not, or that you always thought you'd live in a big house and with a big bank account and suddenly those things are gone. What really allows you to come out the other end is, I think, imagination. It's the ability to, yeah, be open to thinking about who you might be if you're not, the president of Bell Canada, or if you're not, if you've been stripped of your law license or whatever it is. It takes an ability to reimagine, and that is Frank was not an imaginary man. He did not have a strong imagination. Frank was a finance guy. He liked his ledgers. He liked things lined up, his numbers lined up on the left and the right side of his page. He used ledgers to solve complex problems in his life. He'd draw a line down the middle and line up the arguments on one side, and line up the arguments on the other. He was a fact-based, numeric kind of rational guy, and suddenly none of those tools worked for him. There was no ledger, there was no job to apply for, so he needed to find other tools, and it was really his ability to reimagine himself. What were the opportunities in sight at that time? Well, there was really only one, which was about selling Canadian whiskey to the US mob. That was the economic activity of the time. Capital markets weren't hiring people, that's for sure. Brokerages were not taking people on. The banks were not hiring. 1/3 of banks collapsed in the 2 years after the market crashed. There were none of those traditional jobs. Frank had to step outside himself and learn to have skills he never thought he had.
Fascinating, fascinating story. So we followed the steps of the Seagrams and the Brofmans, and
Yes.
became a smuggler of alcohol. That's fun. I followed you both personally in your career for, I don't know, 40 years, and I've
Yes.
always been impressed with you. I got to ask you, can a single mom, can a female have it all? Can they have a family life? Can they have a good marriage? Can they have a career? What's your sense? You've gone through divorce, you said. You've been a lawyer. You've been a business person. You're now an author. You've been a single mom. You've been a mom. You've been a wife. Can a woman have it all today?
Yes, I would say yes, subject to some conditions. It depends upon, how you define it all. I think you can, let's say, mine in the two great rich fault lines of life, which I think are, love and really a sense of pride and a sense of success and achievement in your life. So I found in those early years that I could have those two things. I had a young child that I loved intensely and was the center of my life, and I had a really a rich career. My career was not as rich as I might have liked it if I wasn't trying to be a mom, and there might have been other things I could have done career-wise, for sure. But could I have been a mom without a career? Absolutely not. I needed to support myself and my child, and I think just because of who I am, I needed that set of outside challenges and rewards. So yes, it's a short answer. I think people can. I would add one caveat, and that's good health. It's very hard for people who have health challenges, whether it's just energy levels or physicality, et cetera, to really meet the twin demands of parenting and career at the same time. I was lucky. I've always had very, very robust health. People tease me that I've hardly really never had a sick day in my life. I just am healthy, and that flows, I think, from a really positive attitude and doing some basic commitments to good health. Yeah, but otherwise, what a great time to be a woman it is, where you can. I mean, I can't imagine Katrina's life. That's why when I look back and people ask me, am I Katrina? Am I Frank? I'm much more Frank. I relate to Frank. Frank is a career guy with responsibilities to his firm on his shoulder and a need to show up at that office every day and go into the pit and with his gladiator outfit and make money and bring home the bacon and so on. That's who I relate to. And that sense of loss, if you lost all that. Katrina's life, women had just got the vote. It's 1929. Women had just been fighting for the vote around the world, in America and England and Canada. I think it was 1925 when women got the vote 4 years earlier. So, yeah, life was different. You couldn't hold mortgages in your own name. That's a harder set of circumstances. When I created her as a character, her voice was challenging for me because you tried to think about her world or how you might respond as a woman today, and those options really weren't open to her.
Well, you've certainly reinvented yourself as a lawyer and as a business person and now an author. And so I thank you for joining us tonight and sharing with us the topics of your books. Remind us all the title of the book and where we can all go out and buy it.
Yeah, Pitfall. And it's Pitfall by Terry Kirk. If you Google it, there are other books and issues called Pitfall. So it's Pitfall by Terry Kirk. My name, Terry, is short for Teresa. I used to spell it with an I, and now I'm spelling it with a Y. Just a bit more neutral, kind of gender neutral approach as an author. So it's Pitfall by Terry Kirk, and you'll quickly find it at your local bookstore, at your Indigo, or buy it online, and they'll deliver it to your house within 24 hours.
Terry Kirk, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Good. Thank you so much, Brian.